Blessed are the merciful. And the idea, this one is in Matthew chapter 5 in the Sermon of the Mount, when Jesus was saying, bless this, bless that, is a very famous passage. But today we're going to be focusing on this very specific one where it says, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. This is chapter 5, line number 7. And the notion here, and I put this picture, this image for us, because in a way, if we see if we think about the Beatitudes, or we see this one specifically, we can notice that there's something first, and then there's a sequence, and there's a reflex. There's something that comes after the first one. So blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. It's interesting, even the verb tense here. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. So Jesus was saying the same thing with the afflicted, for they shall be consoled. And all of the other ones, if we think about it, it's interesting because there is this lesson here, very simple, put in a simple way, but yet very profound and hard to apply, of us doing something first, or being something first, or becoming someone else, or someone that we can still become first, and then something else happens. It's one of the 8 Beatitudes. The word in Latin, the word misericordia in Latin comes from miseratio, which means like misery, and cordis, which is heart. So the misery of the heart. But interestingly enough, in the dictionary, if we go to the definition of mercy, it says mercy is the compassionate treatment of those in need, especially when it's with one's power to punish or harm them. It can also refer to forgiveness, benevolence, and kindness. This is not a Spiritist dictionary, by the way. This is a dictionary, the Oxford Dictionary. And the notion here is that it's already telling us a little bit about what mercy is. So how can we be merciful? How can we achieve mercy? And then we will receive mercy as well. But the dictionary itself, without any sort of religious background or religious intention, is already alluding to a couple of things: the forgiveness, the benevolence, the kindness, and a compassionate treatment of those in need, especially when there is a position of power. That's what the dictionary says. So especially when there's something that we can do, or something that can be done to the other person, and we have the power to do something to them, and we show mercy. So mercy relates to that. And one of the things that I thought when I read the dictionary definition, it talks about forgiveness, benevolence, and kindness. It made me think immediately, now bringing more to a Spiritist concept or theme, made me think of question 886 of the Spirits book, when they asked, when Kardec asked the higher spirits about Jesus's understanding of charity. So what was charity based on what Jesus would say or would preach? And they say 3 things. They say benevolence towards everyone, indulgence with other people's flaws, and forgiveness of mistakes. So benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness. So those are already some of the components we'll talk about. But before that, I'm very curious about linguistics and things like that. So I went and I wanted to see different translations of this specific beatitude. So I brought just a few. I couldn't fit them all here, but just a few here, because I do think translation is very important. Being somebody obviously who speaks a few languages, I'm always interested in knowing what was it said in the original one, how did they translate it, because we know words carry power, and understanding how the translation happened is very important. We see, at least for this one, happily, I was relieved to see that there isn't much difference between the different translations of this passage from the Bible. Some of them say, because they shall find mercy. Others say, because they shall obtain mercy, or they will be shown, they will receive. But the good news is that all of them have to do, or they all have to do with this idea that there is, like I said, there is a consequence. It's a sequence. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive, shall obtain, shall be shown mercy. And there is in the Gospel according to Spiritism, which is where I mainly drew the ideas and the source material for this talk today. In the Gospel according to Spiritism, we have an entire chapter on this specific beatitude, chapter number 10. And one of the things it talks about, and I wanted to start with this one, is the forgiveness, because even the dictionary told us that being merciful has to do with being forgiving. So if we think about forgiveness, going back to the Bible, we have this passage in Matthew, when Jesus said, "For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you." So we see how, again, there is this idea of the cause and effect, this idea that if we forgive others that have sinned against us, we will also be forgiven. But if you do not forgive others for their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. Of course, now there are way more shades of gray thanks to Spiritism for us to understand this idea, because just reading this, we can quickly jump to a wrong conclusion that the Father is very punitive. And we go back to that old notion of the bearded man in the sky pointing the finger and punishing us for our mistakes and for the things we did wrong. But the idea here, Jesus is basically talking about the law of cause and effect. He's talking about how we can forgive people and we should forgive others, because then we will also be forgiven. If we show clemency, if we show mercy, we will also obtain mercy. And he says, also in this passage that became very famous, when they're having the conversation and Simon Peter comes to him and says, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me?" When I was first reading this one and I was trying to imagine myself in that time in the head of Simon Peter, why did he suggest a number up to 7 times? Have we ever thought about that? And if I said this in a different talk here, I apologize, but I always like to bring this up. Why 7? Yeah, there's the Kabbalah, there's a bunch of things that are important with 7. But in my head, I can imagine Simon Peter being very, sincere, how he was, very, you get what you see, stuff like that. Very face value. I think in a way it's interesting, because I can also imagine how he was thinking about this. How many times shall I forgive? And in his head, probably like he did a 2-second mathematical count of 2 is very hard, 3 very, very hard. I don't know, 7. That's how I imagine he was probably thinking, like, okay, 7, meaning, let me say a number that's absurd here, absurdly hard to achieve. And then Jesus turned to him and said, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7, which for those who don't want to do the math is 490 times. We must forgive." And I can only imagine his reaction when he heard that 490 times, when he was already thinking maybe 7 was too much or was a lot. And it is. If we bring this to our lives now, we can imagine how hard it is to forgive, truly forgive someone or ourselves, because there's also the self-forgiveness. 7 times. Imagine somebody makes a mistake against you, and you forgive them 7 times. It is something that, at least to me, is very, very far from being something that comes very, very natural. But imagine 70 times 7 now. It's much, much harder. And there's this story of Chico Xavier, who was a great medium in the Brazil culture and contributed so much for Spiritism. There's this story where he was one time giving, he wasn't giving a lecture, he was writing, psychographing some work, and people would come and talk to him. And there was this woman who came and talked to him, and she said, Chico, I know Jesus said to forgive 70 times 7. And I'm telling you, I have a husband who doesn't treat me well. My sons don't treat me well. My siblings don't treat me well. My parents never treated me well. So she was saying a lot of those things. And she said, I have forgiven 490 times everything they've done to me. It's probably more than that. And I have forgiven 490 times. Why do I feel so bogged down still? And Chico was there, and his spiritual guide Emmanuel was next to him, and Emmanuel told Chico something, and Chico turned to the woman. He said, "My daughter Emmanuel is right next to me here, and he's saying that it's not 490 times combined, but it's 490 times each mistake made against you. So if they make a mistake against you, the same mistake, the same person 490 times, that specific one. And it says the woman just turned away and was inconsolable. Makes us think. And forgiveness is far from easy, but in the gospel according to Spiritism, and we are all in this path, of our spiritual depuration and the spiritual growth. In the gospel according to Spiritism, and as usual, I like to say, always say this, top right corner, you're going to find the source material for that specific slide. Kardec is going to say mercy is a complement to mildness, because the person who is not merciful cannot be mild and pacific, which is also another one of the Beatitudes. If we have, and there was this other speaker who was talking about the merciful. He was saying something that I thought was interesting when he said that if there is mercy without justice is subservience, and justice without mercy is tyranny. And I thought it was very impactful and interesting to think about this, because there's also this idea, he's saying that the person who is not merciful, they cannot be mild and pacific. How somebody who's meek, mild, pacific, and a peacemaker, that person needs to have the mercy as one of the angular stones in that progress. And then he also says, does not Jesus teach that mercy must have no limits, when he says that each one must forgive their brothers and sisters not merely 7 times, but 70 times 7? Nobody's going to be counting, or at least I think we shouldn't be counting, how many times I've forgiven that specific person for that specific mistake they make against me, to be like, oh, this was the 32nd time, I'm forgiving you again, now it's the 49th. We don't keep count of that. I hope we don't, because then it's going to breed resentment. But there's this notion, when he says 70 times 7, he was giving this idea that forget about counting it, forget about noticing how many times you're forgiving that person and that mistake they make against you. Just forgive without limits. Just internalize that. Forgive your brothers and sisters not 7 times, but 70 times 7, in the way that means endlessly. Because in this long journey of the soul, we will make mistakes over and over and over again, and vice versa. People will err against us over and over and over. So we must then realize what it is that we're doing, and how are we reacting to that. Are we trying to be more merciful? Are we trying to be more forgiving? Are we trying to be more charitable? Because we learn in Spiritism, outside of charity there is no salvation. But what is charity according to Jesus? Benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness. And the idea of mercy goes very hand in hand with that. And they also talk about forgiveness, and Kardec mentions there's 2 ways to forgive, and this is according to the spirits, and avoid future problems. And this is what they said. This wasn't me just saying avoid future problems. This is what they were saying. Because they're saying, and the little image there with the A and the B, this is what I put for you guys. But there's this idea that there's one way to forgive, is the noble and great way. The spirits are going to say that is the truly generous and without any hidden thoughts. When the person who is forgiving avoids making the other one feel ashamed and feel less, and feel that they made a lot of mistakes and this and that. So the first way is the noble way, is the way to forgive, the way of the heart, forgiving with your full heart. And that's path A there. Meaning, if we go from one point to another, and this other point is our evolutionary way as immortal souls, we realize that when we are internalizing this true way to forgive, it's like we're going from point A to a point further ahead that is in a much, much easier way. The path of forgiveness is much easier when we are truly forgiving without second intention, or without putting the other person down if they're asking us for forgiveness. That is the best way. But there's also B. There's also the way, the second way, which is way we have oftentimes taken, and that's what it does with our progress in a way. It's like we go in circles and we go back and we advance and we get all confused. And the second way, according to the gospel, according to Spiritism, is when someone who has been offended or things they have been offended, which is interesting that they make this sort of asterisk, or things they have been offended, imposes humiliating conditions on the supposed adversary, making them feel the weight of the pardon, which can only further irritation, when instead it should be the act of forgiving someone should bring relief to the other person. But in the second way, there's this, arrogance, this, pride involved. So it's making them feel the weight of their forgiveness, which the spirits are also going to say that the person may even be thinking, oh, look how generous I am. So this is the forgiveness from the lips. The first one is the forgiveness from the heart. The second one is the forgiveness from the lips. And why does that mean avoiding future problems? Because they're going to say, look how many cases of spiritual obsessions occur due to a lack of forgiveness. A lot of them. All we have to do is go to one of the studies Kiki was mentioning in the beginning there, of the work of André Luiz, psychographed by Chico Xavier. We're going to see that without an exception, all of his 12 books have talks about obsession, and there's always cases of people who are obsessing, of cases of spiritual obsession due to a lack of forgiveness. And this is very important for us to realize that, one, we're surrounded by the immaterial world, or it's matter but in a different state, but that's another talk. But we're all surrounded by this invisible world, these invisible spirits, and also there's obsession both ways. This is something as well for us to realize. There's also incarnate to discarnate. There's discarnate to incarnate. There's discarnate. So there's a bunch of different ways this can go. And when we're struggling with forgiveness, either asking for forgiveness or being forgiving, because remember, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. So forgiving first, because then, like Jesus says, our Father will forgive us. And Emmanuel, through the hands of Chico Xavier, he says, and this is one of my favorite quotes by him, if there is one quote that I don't like, I like all his quotes, but this one he says, on days when offense hits us in the face, forgiveness, much more than a blessing for our supposed offenders, is and will always be the best for us. Is the best for us because whenever we forgive, much more than we're just thinking, oh, I'm just doing something for someone else, I'm just relieving them of a burden. What we're doing is we are relieving ourselves of a burden as well. When we're practicing the muscle of mercifulness, when we're trying to be merciful, when we are forgiving, and much more, he says, much more than a blessing to those who have offended us, because that's what we think forgiveness is a lot of the times. Like I said, oh, I'm giving you I truly forgive you and I hope you feel relieved, or at least we think that. But the idea is it's much more to them. It will be the best for us, because then we will not just be carrying on a certain feeling of resentment, because even if we forgive, sometimes we still remember, and that still brings this feeling of sadness, of resentment, and things like that. But Emmanuel here is saying that it is more than to our supposed offenders. And it's interesting because he says supposed offenders, because a lot of the times we get offended without the person actually being somebody who offended us or actually offending us. But he says more than a blessing for our supposed offenders is forgiveness, and will always be the best for us. Because he also says that those who harm us or hurt us, they often find themselves so attached to their own distress that deep down they suffer more than us. So those oftentimes who hurt us, who harm us, they often find themselves so entrenched in their own pain and suffering that deep down they actually suffer more than us, the people who got offended, or the people who they harmed or offended. That is very deep, and that's something for us to think about as well. Ties very closely with mercy, because being merciful has to do with us understanding and the application of this idea of the true forgiveness. And in the book The Consoler, this one also by Emmanuel, psychographed by Chico, we have this one in English now, started this year, thankfully. And they translated, so there's this part here in Matthew chapter 5, says, settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way. So what does it mean while you're still together on the way? Because even though we know about the communication with those who have already gone back to the spirit plane, there's this idea that we have to seize the moment. We have to seize the opportunities. We must not wait idly by resentful beings that we are and just think, oh, I'll forgive them next year. I'll forgive them maybe in 10 years I'll be able to forgive you. We don't know. He says here, do it while you're still together on the way, because we don't know the day of tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen today. We don't know the future. What we have is the present. What we can control is the present. And Jesus is urging us, do it while you're still together on the way, because through the law of reincarnation, through the process of reincarnation, this blessed mechanism that we have, we are together with the people we must be together with. We are exactly where we need to be to continue our own moral progress and to help those around us with theirs. So while we're still together on the way can also be interpreted as we are in this circle of friends or family or co-workers, whatever we are, we have to seize the opportunity that we're still together and learn to forgive and learn to ask for forgiveness as well. And in the book The Consoler, that's why I have it there, question 337, they asked him, how can we carry it out? So how can we carry the reconciliation out if our adversary does not share our desire for reconciliation? Meaning, I want to reconciliate. I want to reconcile with that person. I want to make amends, but the person doesn't want to make amends with me. They don't want anything to do with me. So how can I carry it out? And he's going to say we must always fulfill our evangelical duty, seeking out our adversary for the necessary reconciliation and forgetting any offense committed to us. If the other, and he says here, if the other party persists in resenting us, the matter must be overlooked by us for the sake of true fraternity, because those who maintain the purpose of retaliation already cultivate a living wound in their hearts. For those who maintain the purpose of retaliation already cultivate a living wound in their hearts. That is so hard to do, what Emmanuel is suggesting here, but the main point for us is to realize that we must fulfill our evangelical duty. We must follow the way, the truth, and the life, our Master Jesus, and he already told us. We must seek out the adversary and forget the offense committed against us. And the forgetting here means forgiving. And if the other party still resents us, let them carry on. Let us seek for that truly and sincerely, but understanding that there's also free will, understanding that the other person also has their own progress, has their own things to solve. But the thing is, if they cultivate the retaliation, they are cultivating like he says, a living wound in their hearts. Now on to the second point that we talk about, being merciful. We talked about actually going like from back to front. Indulgence. We talked about forgiveness, but there's also this idea of indulgence. And this one's still chapter 10 of the Gospel according to Spiritism. They're going to say, indulgence does not see the defects of others, or if it does, it avoids speaking of them or divulging them. When will you judge, and this is a question the spirits are asking us, when will you judge first your own hearts, thoughts, and actions without occupying yourselves with what your brothers and sisters are doing? When? So it's not seeing the defects of others. But if we do see them, the indulgence here is saying, let's not judge them. Let's avoid spreading the gossip, spreading whatever it is that they did wrong. And nowadays with social media and the internet, that's close to impossible, because that's all we see. That's all we see, these viral videos, these viral news of somebody fighting, or somebody doing something very wrong, or somebody shaming themselves, or it's all bad, 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 because unfortunately that's what sells. But that's a whole nother point. But the idea here is for us to realize, let us not do that. Let us be the change we wish to see in the world, which is my favorite quote ever. And they're saying, when will you judge first your own heart? So when will you look yourself in the mirror first? Really look inward as well. So you look outward and you look inward to realize what it is that you're doing without having to occupy yourself with others. And they're going to say, be indulgent with regard to the faults of others, whatever these may be. Do not judge with severity any actions but your own. Then the Lord will be indulgent towards you according to the manner in which you have shown it to others. Isn't that what we say in the heavenly prayer as well when we're asking for forgiveness? Or Our Father. It's the same thing. Forgive others as we forgive them. Forgive us as we forgive others. So if we're indulgent with others, we're going to receive indulgence. If we are merciful, we will be shown mercy. So there's this idea. They're saying, do not judge with severity anyone else but your own, but yourself, or your own actions. Why? Because we don't know. We barely know what goes on with ourselves, what we have already done in past lives. We don't know that. Imagine someone else. We have no idea what they're going through. We have no idea what battles they're fighting. We have no idea what battles they already won. We may look at them, we may judge them, thinking, oh, look at this person who would do that. I would never even imagine doing such a thing. But we don't realize, and this is something Joanna De Angelis also talks about, we don't realize that that person may already be somebody in when they're already recovering from a sickness, from an addiction, from something else, and we're there with arrogance judging them for something that seems so lowly, when we're not realizing that for them, that something may already be a step in the right direction, may already be a more evolved step. So that's why we must realize this and practice indulgence with the faults of others, because we can't really judge people. We really can't. And Joanna De Angelis also, who wrote Through the Hands of Divaldo in the book Happy Life, a small book of messages, she said something that I love. She says, you're not an overseer of other people's behavior. This is it. You're not an overseer of other people's behaviors, which I like to joke that's a job that a lot of us, we all take at times, and that's a non-paid job. It's a volunteer job, being overseer of other people's behavior, pointing the finger saying, look, did you see what that person did? Oh my God, And that's a problem, because we're not being indulgent when that happens. And then they also talk in the book of Gospel According to Spiritism, is it reprehensible to make note of the imperfections of others when this cannot result in any benefit for them, seeing that it will not be disclosed to them? So let's think together. Is it reprehensible? So is it wrong to make note of the imperfections of others when this cannot result in any benefit to them, seeing that will not disclose it? Meaning it's going to stay in my head. I'm going to judge that person a lot, very negatively, and I'm going to notice all their imperfections, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to mention, I'm not going to, they'll never know that I thought that. What do they say? Everything depends on the intention. For sure, it is not forbidden to see evil where it exists. It would also be really inconvenient to see only good in all places. This illusion would prejudice progress. The mistake would be in making the observation result in the detriment of your neighbor. Our tongues are very fast, our thoughts are very fast. So oftentimes that doesn't just stay inside our own heads, but we also learn with Spiritism the power that our thoughts have, and the way they change the cosmic fluid and altered realities and all of that. So depends on the intention. That's why I bolded and I italicized that part, because it always depends on the intention. And they're saying for sure it is not forbidden to see evil where it exists. Jesus himself condemned evil. He didn't just sit idly by. He didn't just watch things that were wrong and didn't say anything about it. But the intention of a spirit of that order, of the caliber, is always very different than our intentions, which are still murky, which are still like rife with lower tendencies and lower qualities. It would also be really inconvenient to see only good, of course, because if we thought that everything was good, that means we wouldn't do anything to change, which means there would be an issue as well, because then we would be either slowing or halting the march of progress. Which brings us in the indulgence. They also talk about slander and judgment. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged. But the things, and this is something that Jesus said, the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, and slander. So this part in Matthew here was where they were discussing what they should eat, or if they ate certain types of food, they would be impure and all of that. So it would defile their bodies and their souls and all of that. And Jesus was basically saying, you're too worried maybe with what's going in and not what's coming out, because what's coming out of the mouth, meaning the words that are coming out of the mouth, these are coming from the heart, and these words defile them. What comes out from that defiles them, because it shows how the heart is. It shows the state of that heart. And then he says, anyone who speaks ill of a brother, this one is in James, speaks ill of the law and judges the law. And if you judge the law, you are no longer a follower of the law, but a judge. So if you speak ill of someone else, you're judging them, and therefore you're not the observer, you're a judge. And we're not judges. We cannot be judges. There's only one judge. There's only one being, there's only one being that can do that. And the thing is, we're not that being, but we oftentimes like to think that we are. So we become judgmental. So what I wanted to bring here as well is this: in the book of Hope, there is this prescription that Emmanuel gives us that I love. Anytime I can put this one in my lectures, I always do so, because he's gonna say, how can we, what can we do with our words? Our words. He says, Emmanuel says, words are agents in the construction of all buildings of life. The verb is the light of life, with which Jesus himself used to bequeath. To bequeath means to give, or to leave by, or to hand out. Used to bequeath to us the renewing gospel. So he's going to give us a prescription of how we should use our words. How, and this ties greatly with being merciful, being indulgent, being benevolent. He's going to say, in everyday work, be your verbs, your words, as natural as the simple bread on the table. In the effective exchanges, let us use our words as pure water. In serious moments, let us do it like the surgeon's scalpel, which prudently, this is my favorite one, prudently limits itself to the incision in the diseased area without unnecessary blows. On sad days, let us consider it an efficient remedy without deviating from the dosage. So, in everyday work, let our words be as natural and as a simple bread on the table, because what Emmanuel is saying here, let them be simple, let them satiate the hunger, but without excess and without lacking as well, because the simple bread on the table just does just that. It does the work. In the effective exchanges, let us use it as pure water, wow, which also quenches the thirst, but is pure, is transparent. So in the effective exchanges, let our words be as pure water, transparent, pure, without any extra. In serious moments, and again, I said this is my favorite one. Let us do it because there are serious moments. We're far from being perfect beings in a perfect state, and those around us are also not perfect. So there will be serious moments. So how should we use the verb? Like the surgeon's scalpel. I don't think I could ever come up with such a better analogy or imagery for the use of the verb, the surgeon's scalpel, which is limited to the blow or like the incision in the diseased area, the area that it must, and without any necessary cuts. Because if we think of a surgeon operating, he's using or she's using the scalpel exactly in the area and exactly in with the necessary damage to the skin in order to remove that greater evil. He's not saying that we should use our words in the serious moments as the, which we all often do, as the, I like to say, like as the axe of the lumberjack, right? Just like blah, just getting everything that we can with our words. No, just like the scalpel. Imagine that next time, a scalpel. So next time that you're in a serious moment, remember, how can my words right now be just as a scalpel and not as the axe? And on sad days, an efficient remedy without deviating from the dosage. Because if we deviate from the dosage, there's also going to be complications, just like with any medicine. The motes and the bean, and this is perhaps a famous quote that we see in the Bible and the Gospel according to Spiritism. They're also going to talk about that. It says, and why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? Hypocrite, first remove, this one in Matthew, first remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Because it is very easy to do what the little hand is doing there. We're pointing the finger. We're complaining about someone else. We're judging. We're seeing the little speck without seeing the plank in our own eye. And it says here, one of the follies, this is from the Gospel according to Spiritism, one of the follies of humanity consists in seeing wrongdoing and evil in others before seeing it in ourselves. Of course, it's much easier to see in the other person than to see it in ourselves, which, depending on the psychological school that somebody ascribes to, they may say that's actually that's projection. There's a defense mechanism. There's different things that can be related to that. But the idea here is seeing the wrongdoing and evil in others is much easier than seeing in ourselves, because when we see in others, it's like we are removing the responsibility on having to change. We're pointing to the person like, hey, you're doing this wrong. You need to change this. You need to change that. You need to improve here. It's much harder when it's us, because if I think I need to improve this, nobody's going to do the work for me but me. I'm the one responsible for that. And that is very much the challenge. That is way harder than just pointing at someone else and say, hey, you're being prideful here, or you're being selfish. Which brings me to the next part that they talk about, which is pride, being the father of many vices, is also the negation of many virtues. Therefore, it was because pride is the principal obstacle to progress that Jesus tried so hard to combat pride. Pride being this principal obstacle to progress, as we learn in the Spirit's book as well, in the Gospel according to Spiritism, and in any book basically that you pick up on Spiritism, this idea that for a moral progress, the two big elements that are halting the progress or slowing the progress down are pride and selfishness. Pride and selfishness. They're going to say in the Gospel according to Spiritism that pride leads a man to disguise his own defects, and therefore he doesn't do this work right here. He doesn't look to see what it is that I need to change still. And they're even going to go further and say, they're going to go even further and say that it is found to be the motive and base for almost all human actions. So the actions are still based too much in pride. And we also see selfishness. What did Jesus preach so much? Charity and humility. And if we think about it, charity and humility are the perfect antithesis to pride and selfishness. Charity is the complete opposite of selfishness, and humility is the complete opposite of pride. So these are the two elements that are very important when we're talking about, again, going back to the Beatitude, blessed are the merciful. How can we be more merciful? By trying to be more charitable, to be more humble, so we can attack pride and selfishness at their core, because these two things are very much in the forefront of our minds and our actions, unfortunately. But that's the path that we must take. We must be able to see. They're even going to say this. They're going to say, in order to be able to judge ourselves, it is first necessary that we see ourselves intimately reflected. So that's what they're going to say in the gospel according to Spiritism. Intimately reflected, as in a mirror. And we must ask ourselves, and they say this, and I love this part, because they say, and they even I think they're giving us a little bit of a leeway to be judgy, but which is already, if we're able to do this, is already good enough for a lot of times. They say, if you were to look at someone else doing what you're doing, what would you say? If you looked at someone else, if you observed someone else doing, saying that thing you said in that manner, behaving in that manner, what would you say? This is the next step, to be able to realize that and be like, yeah, no, I would not approve if I saw someone else doing that. Having the humility to admit that, and the self-forgiveness to forgive yourself for doing that, and improving, because it all leads to that. It leads to the moral improvement. And I brought a few stories here. This one is, we're talking about being merciful. Let's think of Jesus, when the adulterous woman was there. And this Amelia Rodriguez, she writes beautifully. Some of her books are in English, not all of them, unfortunately. But Prelude to the Divine Kingdom is one that is in English, amazing book. And there's also a story on the adulterous, the woman who committed adultery. And as Jesus was getting there, he saw that there was this commotion. They had grabbed this woman who was basically half naked. They were about to cast stones and stone her to death. And in John narrates that the scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman, and I'm going to read this part, who had been caught in adultery, and presented her, saying, Master, this woman was caught in adultery. Moses orders that such women be stoned. So what do you say? This is, again, another one of the times where they were trying to corner Jesus, because one way or the other, same thing with, should we pay the tributes to Caesar, right? They always try to do that, to corner him, because if he says one thing, he's going to have criticism. If he says another, there's also going to be a negative reaction. So what he did was amazing. As they were outraged, as they was, and Amelia is going to tell us this, as they were outraged and completely full of selfishness and pride and projecting their own problems in that woman and all of that, he knelt down on the ground and he started to write things on the sand, on the ground there. He started to write things on the ground, and people just talking. He was writing things on the ground, and he was writing things that were like, some sins. He was writing some sins. He was writing a lot of negative things that people are not a lot of negative qualities. And that's when he rises and he says, he says the famous, who is here without any sin can cast the first stone. But he wrote all those things on the ground, because when people saw them, it's like all of a sudden they were muted. They all of a sudden they couldn't, because those things that he wrote on the ground so delicately, if we think about it, this is Jesus' way. He didn't point the finger and said, you are adulterers as well, you are a thief, you are a slanderer, no. He wrote things on the ground, so when people looked at that, they realized, like, oh, I've done that. I done that. So in their own heads, they started to deflate. And in the end, nobody threw one single stone at that woman. Nobody threw one single stone. And this is Jesus being merciful, showing indulgence, showing benevolence. This was him doing that. And can we imagine being in that crowd in that moment? And all of them started to leave. And interestingly enough, John says in the gospel that the old ones left first. Of course, because if he wrote a bunch of things on the ground, people who have lived longer have sinned more. So they would see that would immediately fits the bill, and they would just leave. Amelia also in another chapter, interestingly enough, she talks about how Jesus saw that the husband of that woman was there on the crowd as well, and he started to have a conversation with him via thought, meaning and asking him, where were you? And I'm not gonna spoil it. I want you guys to read it. Prelude to the Divine Kingdom, it's the other book that has this story. And in the gospel, according to Spiritism, there is this, they do talk about the casting the first stone, and they say, before we blame someone for a fault, let's see if the same blame can't be given to us. A lot of the times it will be given to us. And I'm not gonna say every time, but a lot of the times. But for those times that somebody says, oh, I read this, and no, I haven't, I'm judging that person, and I haven't done what they did, so can I cast the stone? No, because then we have the indulgence piece. So even if we think that we're better, or if we have progressed more, or if we have achieved perhaps a state where we don't make that mistake, because rest assured, we all make those mistakes, either in this life or in another life. If we are at a point where we have already improved, then we cannot judge, because we don't know what that other person is going through, and we have to be indulgent and benevolent. So what about censorship of evil? This is not my question. This is something that they talk also in the gospel according to Spiritism, because they're saying that Jesus could not prohibit the condemnation of evil, since he himself gave us an example, having done so in strong terms. Jesus was not, when he saw evil, he wasn't quiet. He didn't sit idly by. But the idea that they say here is that the authority to censor is in direct proportion to the moral authority of the one who censors. Jesus had that authority because he has lived billions and billions of years, and he is already a spirit of the first class, first order, one and only class, and while we are not. We don't have that authority to truly judge. We don't have that authority to lay the law. We don't have that authority to do anything of that nature, even if we think we have the right. But Jesus did. Jesus could, because he had lived, and he has improved himself in ways that it's going to take us billions and billions of years as immortal souls to get there. Coming more towards the end, we have the parable of the story of the unmerciful servant as well. This one is in Matthew, where they were saying that the kingdom of heaven was like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. This is what Jesus was saying. But as he began the settlement, there was this man who owned him, and depending on the translation, it's going to change. But in this one that I got, I think it's from the New King James Version, it says, or the New International Version, it says 10,000 bags of gold. So this is what the man owned him, 10,000 bags of gold. But the idea that Jesus wanted to say here was this notion that he owned a quantity that he could spend all his life, and he would not be able to acquire that quantity. Look how strong those words were, like how impactful and meaningful, that Jesus was alluding to a quantity that could not be gathered in one lifetime. But since he was not able to pay, the master, that master said that, no, your wife and all your children are going to be sold to repay some of your debts and slavery and all of that. And the servant fell on his knees, and that's the image we have there. Be patient with me. I'll try to pay back everything. Even if I can, I'll pay what I can, this and that. But the servant's master, Jesus is going to say, took pity on him, canceled the debt, 10,000 bags of gold, and let him go. He canceled the debt, let him go free, his wife and children free. You owe me nothing more. But then what happened? The servant, as soon as he was out, he found one of the other servants who owed him 100 silver coins. So 10,000 bags of gold and 100 silver coins. This other man owed him 100 silver coins. He got him for the collar, and he started to choke him and say, you gotta pay me, you gotta pay me. And the person said, oh no, be patient with me. Basically said the same thing that he had told the master, his master before. Oh, be patient with me, please, please. And he's like, no. And then he went and he told the man, called the guards and said, this man owes me 100 silver coins. And then he threw the man in jail. The man went to prison. But then everybody else that was around, they went and told the master what happened. Hey, that person you just relieved from the debt of 10,000 bags of gold, he just threw someone in jail for 100 silver coins that they owed him. So then the master comes and he says, shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? Here's the word mercy. That's why it's the unmerciful servant, because we ask for God to forgive us. We ask for forgiveness, but we can't forgive other things that are way, way smaller than the problems we have caused. And this is what Jesus was trying to teach in this parable here. And lastly, but not least, Luke chapter 10, the Good Samaritan. The famous parable where they were trying to ask him, teacher, when they came to Jesus and they said, teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? This was like a person who was a lawyer or somebody who knew the law very well. And he said, what should I do to inherit eternal life? And then Jesus says, what is written in the law? That was Jesus' answer. And he said something else too. He says, what is your reading of it? And I love this part. Because it said, what is written there? What is your reading of it? How do you interpret it? And then the man, being very eloquent and knowledgeable, says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, okay, you answer rightly. Do this, and you shall live. But the man wanted to justify himself, and he said, but who's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? He was trying to throw Jesus in the fire as well. And then Jesus came and told the story of the Good Samaritan. He says that a certain man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves who stripped him of his clothing, wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a certain priest came down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So the priest came on the road, saw the man, half dead, beaten up, passed far from him. Likewise, a Levite, when he arrived at the place, came and looked and passed by on the other side, also passed far from the man. But a certain Samaritan, and it's interesting that Jesus says Samaritan because they didn't like the Samaritans. But he says, no, but the Samaritan comes. And when he saw him, he had compassion, so he had mercy. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, poured oil and wine, and he sent him on his animal, took him to the inn, and told the innkeeper, look, here's 2 denarii or 2 pieces of coin. Take care of him. I'll come here tomorrow if you spend anything else treating this man. By the way, this complete stranger. If you spend anything else, I'll come here and I'll give you more. And then that was the teaching of Jesus about mercifulness. And then he says, who helped the neighbor? Like he poses these questions, and people were trying to still grasp, but there was this notion that when Jesus says, so which one of these 3 do you think was neighbor to him who fell among the thieves? And the man said, he who showed mercy on him. Here's the word, mercy. Blessed are the merciful. Then Jesus said to him, go and do likewise. And that's the invitation to us all. To help those who have fallen, to help those with benevolence, with indulgence, with the forgiveness in our hearts, and to have mercy. Because there is also this other passage that Emmanuel tells us that in the book Courage, message number 18, where after he told this story, when the disciples, right after he told this story, the disciples were gathering telling, that man, they didn't help him, only the Samaritan did. And Jesus came to them and he said, you know what? Somebody who was going through that same road, spreading love, would have think of the Samaritan helping them, and it would have sent thoughts of love to him. That person would also have sent thoughts of love to the innkeeper who agreed to help that stranger. And maybe if he had spent more, who knows if the guy would come back next day to pay him more. But the innkeeper took him as well. So Jesus would say they would also send a thought of gratitude to the innkeeper, but they would also send a thought to the two that passed, the Levite and the priest, and they also would send a thought to the thieves, who are brothers, all sons in the eyes of God, but are very much in the wrong path. So Jesus basically elevated this idea of being loving and merciful and benevolent and indulgent. But the main message here for us is, he says, go and do likewise. Let us try to apply these teachings with the idea that, blessed are the merciful when we're being merciful, for we will also be shown mercy. And I wish everybody a blessed week. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Yuri.